The time has come to wrap up our project in a nice, neat electronic presentation form, and we are going to use Adobe InDesign, which we have seen before. But now we're going to dig a little deeper into some of the features of the program to help us put together a more interesting and compelling presentation. So first of all, we want to create new, don't we? Click Create New. And if you remember, Adobe InDesign wants to talk about picas, and we don't want to talk about picas. We want to talk about inches. So first of all, set your units to inches, and we're going to go with a standard print size here, 36 inches wide, 24 inches high. This is an architectural sheet size known as Arch D, as in David. Yes, I know we are presenting this one here electronically, but you always want to be prepared to print, especially once the global pandemic is over and we can go and present our drawings as we normally would on printed boards. It's better to set it up in advance. Also, it gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about resolution. Anyway, also, if you check the facing pages option, it will give you a layout that looks like a book with a left and right side page. We are not doing a book. We are just doing a linear presentation, probably with a couple of slides. And do make note that there are other standard page sizes which we could use, but we're not going to because we're presenting on a screen. So click Create, and you're ready to go. What you'll see in the InDesign interface, hopefully these tools are actually going to start to look very familiar. For example, there's the direct selection tool versus the regular object selection tool. There are a number of different types of text. In this case, you can type along a path. And then look at that. There's even pens that we saw in our work with Adobe Illustrator and with Photoshop. So all these different tools, they work in more or less the same way. Same with the gradient tool, pan, zoom, foreground color, background color. These are all very similar to our other programs in Adobe. You can also display or hide the rulers. And there are grids available that you can put in, and you can even snap to the grid. Again, just like our other programs. Also, if you are going to a computer you're not familiar with, you're going to want to check the different standard views here that they have for toolbar arrangement, the workspace. The Essentials is what I'm showing you here. Some of you may see Essentials Classic as the default. It just kind of depends on your installation. Finally, there are tool palettes kind of collected over here on the right side. You click on them and the palette pops up, properties, pages, and any menu that you pull up here in the window toolbar, you can absolutely just drag it over to the right here and have it be available a little more quickly. Not that it's such an onerous task to pull the pull-down menu, but it is sometimes good for frequently used tool. So objects in InDesign are placed just like we've done in our other programs. Control or Command D is a keyboard shortcut you're probably going to want to commit to memory because you do a lot of placing in InDesign. And really, that's the beauty of InDesign. You can collect all sorts of different images and other object types in your project using InDesign. And if you look here at the previews here, which, by the way, you can change how these look. They can be extra large icons if you want. The icons, of course, for images look like the image. The icons for other types of objects are going to look like the program that created them. So it's not showing us what the Photoshop document looks like here or the Illustrator document, even though those are ostensibly Adobe products. And what's interesting, you can place all sorts of objects, including Word documents and PowerPoint slides, PDF files, and then, of course, other Adobe projects. So let's import our bubble diagram first. And as we've done before, make sure you show import options here in the menu. The reason is that will give us a chance, I'll just click open, that will give us a chance to choose which of the pages in this project we are going to import. So I have my bubble diagram, I have the bubble diagram legend, and then I have my start of a block diagram here, which is not required, but is a great way to pick up a little extra credit if you're looking for some. So let's start with our bubble diagram. And again, there are these options here for what to crop to. The artwork will crop it as close to the objects as possible, whereas if you crop to the media, that will basically take the size of your layout, your paper there in Illustrator. So I'm going to do that. The other thing is, when you bring the object in, be sure not to click and drag, but just to click. Clicking and dragging allows you to control the size of the object. However, I want to just click to place the object so that it retains the original size. And this is true most of the time because you've configured the drawing in Illustrator or in Photoshop to be a certain size and a certain resolution. So I'm going to place my bubble diagram, and I think I'll also place my layer. Objects in InDesign are organized in a kind of funny way. Let's take a look here at our bubble diagram. And as before, scrolling with the Alt button held down will zoom you in and out. Interesting enough, scrolling without the Alt button pressed down will kind of pan you up and down. Holding down the space bar activates the pan tool, the little hand. And you can also do Control plus and Control minus. Now, peculiar thing about the way InDesign displays objects here, you see how they're kind of a little fuzzy. If I were to zoom in on them, they all look a little pixelated, a little zigzaggy, and that's because InDesign is lazy. And if you go to the View menu and choose Display Performance, you'll see that actually it is displaying what's called the typical display. We want a high quality display. Now, this could potentially slow your computer down if you have a lot of images in your drawing, so just be aware of that. But I think for a lot of us, when we don't have that set, it's annoying because everything looks kind of fuzzy, and that's irritating. Now, the other peculiar thing about InDesign is that this isn't just a picture. This is actually the original document that we're just kind of linking to here in InDesign, which means if you make any changes to it, it will update. And we've seen this before with the icons that we used in this very document. So if you think about it, if you want to change the eyeball and the look of that icon, you change the original Illustrator file, it will update. It needs to update in the secondary Illustrator file with the bubbles in it, and then that file will need to update here in InDesign for the change to be reflected. So it may be that you'll need to update more than one file. One thing that you can do to help yourself out is open up the Links menu. And this menu will list any drawings in your project that are linked to other files, and it will also give you any sub-documents that you can find. And if they've changed, you can update them here just by checking from one of the menu items here, Relink, for example. And I'm going to just drag this links menu into my sidebar so that it's handy and it looks even kind of linkish when you take a look at it. Now, the other thing is that InDesign objects are put into what are called frames. So if I resize this frame, and I'll just use the grip here on the outside of the frame, what will happen is it does not change the object inside. What it changes is the dimension of the frame. And this can be a little maddening if you are forever forgetting to click the right object. If you want to, say, resize the whole object and its frame, you can just hold down the Control button, I believe it's Option on a Mac, and then when you drag, it will resize the object. The other thing is that if you hold down Shift, it will change it proportionally. If you don't hold down Shift, it will warp your object, even though the original object in Illustrator is not warped. But you can just undo back to get back to where we were. Control Z, by the way, is undo. Control Y is redo. Now, if you do happen to resize the frame and you want to move around the image inside the frame, just double-click inside the image. Now, what you'll see here, this brown box, is the outline of the image itself. And we can change that independently of the frame, and the same options apply. You can warp it, or you can just change its size. To stop editing the contents of the frame, just double-click outside of it, and you should be able to grab the frame again. Another fun feature of frames is if you right-click on the frame, you can choose how the objects change based on the frame, and it's quite complicated, but you can fill the frame proportionally, which could potentially warp your base image. Now, typically, our images are architectural, and we don't want to warp them. So what we can do is we can fit the frame to the content, or we can fit the content to the frame. I'm just going to fit the frame to the content, and you'll see that the frame expands to match the outline of my original Adobe Illustrator document. Fun fact is that you can draw a shape either with the pen tool or even just one of these standard shapes here. And when you place an image with that selected, the image you place will get kind of cropped to that shape. And you can even edit the individual handles here, the individual grips, by clicking them with the the direct selection tool. Come in there and double click on them and grab each individual grip and really warp the shape pretty dramatically. So let's take a look at the other required drawings that we're going to need for our project here. Of course, we've got the bubble diagrams and the legend. We should bring in the architectural program. Now that's going to be a Microsoft Word document, or you can use an image file, either one. The rendered floor plan, of course, is Photoshop. The materials samples, those are going to be directly from the internet. So you hopefully have saved a copy of those images from when you use them to create patterns in Photoshop. If not, by all means, just draw a rectangle, 1,000 pixels or 1,600 pixels square, whatever the original size was, more or less. And then you can paint that pattern onto the square and save it out to get yourself those samples if you forgot to save them. The rendered perspective would be nice to have, but also the images showing the layers in that rendered perspective. Those are going to be nice to help kind of describe the recipe that you used to create your perspective view. You should have inspirational image or images showing kind of the graphical elements you liked from our examples that I posted, a Pinterest page of examples. You obviously don't have to copy exactly the rendering style, as I mentioned, but it is so nice to be able to see how things have been done in the past in order for you to adapt them to your own needs. And there are any number of things that you could copy or at least try to emulate, things like materials, line work, shadows. You should describe next to that inspirational image with a piece of text what it is that you found inspirational and what you tried to use in your project. Same with the board composition. I'd like you to have at least one image to show a board that you thought was really cool or interesting or just well done. And again, a brief description of which graphical elements you liked and why you tried to emulate them. Finally, that you should on the board have some background organizational graphics, a border, title block, and titles under each drawing. Those are going to be created in InDesign. So back in InDesign, I am placing documents here, and so back in InDesign, let's place our documents. And I just tapped Control-D to bring up the Place menu. Now, in your folder, which hopefully you have collected all of your documents, you could just click on one document and then choose some later document. And while holding down Shift, if you click, it will select all the documents in between. Now, I don't want to do that. I want to kind of bunch them together. I'm going to grab all of my material samples here. You can see I've kind of cropped them to be square. If I hold down Control and click on the images, you see that it allows me to select ones that are non-contiguous. The other thing is you'll want to turn off the show import options. We don't really need that with images and image files. We really only need it when we're importing Adobe documents. Now here in the project, you'll see that my cursor tells me the number of objects I have selected. Again, I am going to click to place rather than click and drag. And if you look carefully, you can see that some of these images are bigger than others. Now, I'm just going to stack up all my materials. And I can resize these images so that they are kind of collected together. Remember, this board, I'm just collecting the images right now. I haven't actually composed anything. But remember, you have to hold down Control to make sure that you resize these images by resizing the frame and the contents. The other thing is hold down Shift so that you don't change the proportions of the original images. And I'll just group these all together here in the corner. The other thing we need to talk about is the resolution of these placed images. Now, when I go to place an image, how does InDesign know how big it is? Well, that information is embedded in the file. So I've created a section perspective here, and if you leave your mouse over the object, it will tell you the dimensions in pixels. What it will not tell you is how many pixels are squeezed into each inch. So when I place this object, and I'll just click once to place it so that it places the original size. Well, the number of pixels per inch was defined in the original document. So that's why it's sized at whatever it is, roughly 20-something inches. If we open that document in Photoshop, and images you get off the internet, you absolutely should always open them in Photoshop before bringing them into InDesign. I can check the image size. So just go to the image pull-down list and choose image size. And what you'll see is, oh yes, it thinks it's about 20 inches wide, but the resolution is very low. Now what that means is we usually print at about 200 pixels per inch. This is only 72, so it's almost one third of what it should be. We can change this to be 200 pixels per inch. And one thing to be aware, don't check the resample button when you do that, because you'll be adding pixels that aren't really there. What it will do is it will say, oh, 200 pixels per inch, your image is whatever, 1,000 pixels wide, so at 200 pixels per inch, 1,000 divided by 200 is 5 inches. When you click OK, you don't see anything any different. And of course, don't forget to save the document. And I've called it image size corrected here so that I recognize which one is which. Now when I click to place it, you'll see it's much smaller. And the reason this is important is when you go to print this document, you are printing at 200 pixels per inch. That means this drawing will be dotty. It will look bad, and we don't want to look bad. Make sure you image size correct any suspicious images that you get from the internet, and that's basically all of the images from the internet. And once you've got all your documents placed, it's probably a good idea to save this whole project, Control S to save it, and put it in somewhere where you'll remember. And it's always a good idea to put it into the same folder as the rest of your documents. Just helps you keep track of things. Especially remember, these documents are linked, so InDesign will be looking for the original files every time it opens. Now with so many requirements, one thing that's clear is I'm going to need another board. And the way you create boards is you go to the Pages menu, and it looks like a pair of pages here. And now we get to talk about how InDesign is arranged. And first of all, it has a preview of the page that I have now, and it has a little A next to it, and the A is the A-master, and that's the master page. Any page that uses that master will have anything on the master placed on that page. And let me show you what I mean. I'm going to create a new page. It also has the A on it. And of course it's blank, and I could easily say, let's see, my first page will have my bubble diagrams, and maybe my second page will have all the perspective stuff. And here I've placed the plan, the materials used in the plan, and the basic bubble diagram information up here at the top. And I've placed all the perspective information down here at the bottom. Now I've left an area my title block under here. To add the title block, double-click on the master. And what this will do, it'll bring up a view of the master sheet. And anything I place on this master will affect both of these sheets, any sheet that has that master applied. Now, you can have more than one master. You can have an A and a B sheet and a C sheet. Now, in our case, we're just doing a linear presentation, so it's more akin to PowerPoint or Google Slides. And those programs also have a master slide option where you can add type and other graphics. You can also get a little more sophisticated color control by just double-clicking on the color here. And this will bring up the color picker menu. It's not exactly the same as the color picker menu in, say, Illustrator, but it can get pretty far. Obviously, you can control individual channels here, the red, green, or blue. But L kind of determines, I don't know what L stands for, but you can control like tint and shade. And again, we saw in Illustrator, sometimes these colors can be a little bit heavy, so you can lighten up the colors this way. Just click OK to get through the menu. You also have limited but somewhat interesting stroke options here. We can give the stroke a color like we've done before. I'll just pick black, and you can change the size. Just again, I'm in the properties menu. It's so much easier to do it there. And there are some basic brushes that you can get here. Let's try, I don't know, a hash line here. Again, each of these is going to be sensitive to the stroke size. Interesting enough, you can also control the corner options here to get I don't know, some interesting effects. You'll want to fiddle around with this to try and find a fun way to change this and make an interesting border. Now we can also add some text to this box here. If you click on the text tool, one interesting thing is if I were to click out here, you see how my cursor is giving me a rectangle? That means it's giving me a new text box. If I move my mouse over an object, it should give me a circular cursor, and that indicates, oh, you want this to be a text box. And I can just click inside the box, and now I'm adding text inside the box that I just drew. Any shape really can be a text box, and of course you have all your usual text controls. Is it centered or not? Is it justified, double justified, whatever it is? And then you can type in the title of your project. In this case, I'm going to call it The Sandwich Shop. And of course, here, let's center it rather than do that. Oh, and look at that terrible spelling mistake. And of course, we do want our text to be in the middle of our boxes. It looks a lot neater that way. You can just right-click on the text box, or text frame, I guess it really is. And there are some options that you can adjust that are kind of a little bit farther than what you're seeing in the menu here. The big one that we want to change is the vertical justifications. Justification controls which way the text is kind of leaning. In this case, the vertical justification, we can change that to center justified, and your text should move down to the middle. And this is nice if you happen to resize your box, the text will follow along. The only other text tool that's at our availability here is type along a path. And again, you have to have pre-drawn a path in order to make it work. And then you can just draw right in this area. I can start typing away. And all the same tools are available. We can control the size of the text and all that. And this is, again, a fun way to make a more interesting drawing. It absolutely is minimal compared to the text tools in Illustrator, so it is possible to create your title block in Adobe Illustrator if you want these more sophisticated text tools, brushes, and all that. And then you can just place the Illustrator document onto your master file. But these are going to be adequate for me. And if we're back in the Pages menu, you'll see that we're still editing the master page. To get back to editing our regular page, just double-click on the page you want to change. And you can see that my title block is now in the way of my plan, and it's kind of a big title block anyway. But you will want to include the name of your project, and by all means, you can use a generic title like mine, like Sandwich Shop, but you could also call it the Brody Memorial Sandwich Shop, or you could call it the COVID-19 Sandwich Shop, whatever you prefer. Don't forget to put your name in there, maybe even the class you're in, and the name of the project. Those all can be smaller text. Now, the normal rule of thumb is that titles should be, I don't know, anywhere no bigger than 144 point. That's pretty big as far as text goes. And the reason 144 comes to mind is points. It takes about 72 points to make 1 inch. And 2 inches is a pretty decent size for the title on a sheet. Of course, we will be presenting these electronically, so you won't want to let your text size get too small. But I think for drawing titles, 18 point is probably plenty. But then when you get to the sheet size, you're going to want to make sure it's at least an inch or two high. And there is a hierarchy. Anything like your name, the name of the class, that should not be as big as the over. Now, as you're moving around objects, in this case, I'm going to use my select tool to arrange some of my nice product samples here. One thing you'll notice is that the cursor will change depending on where it is. If it's a hand, what that means is, I'll use this material, it's actually going to modify the object inside the frame. So let's see if I can get my hand back. I'll just double click in here to get the hand. If you're selecting an object and it's a triangular cursor as opposed to the hand, and again, I'm just moving my cursor from one part to the other of this object, now it's going to move. Clicking and dragging will just move the entire frame and its contents. Now, let's say I want them all to be the same size, which I do. I can select one of the objects and change it here in the Properties menu. I'll make this about 2.2 inches. Why 2.2? I don't know. It just struck me. And then I can select all of my other objects here that I want to be the same size, and there is an option here under Transform Again, and it will do either an individual transformation. It will make them all that 2.2 inches high and wide, or I can do the sequence, which is to say I did 2 steps to this option. Transform Sequence Again. And then if I do it individually, it will change each object to have that same transformation. If I didn't do it individually, just to show you what it looks like, it will make the whole object into 2.2 inches square. And you can do this with any number of different changes. Now, I think I'm going to have 2 columns of these lovely samples here. I think that should work out pretty nicely. I think one of my materials was actually just a texture I added. Now, of course, I can, as I'm moving these objects around, I can use the Smart Cursor to help me align objects. But as we saw in our other programs, there are actually ways to space these objects more evenly. There's using these different align options. For example, I could make them all in a column. I could also use a specific spacing if I wanted. So for example, if I wanted them to be 3 inches from each other, I can just use the Distribute Vertical Space tool. The dimension you type in will be the spacing between the objects, so be careful here. But then just click the Distribute Vertical Spacing tool, and like magic, they will be perfectly spaced. I can do the same with these objects here. Just use that same vertical spacing and align them inside like so. I can even use that same procedure on a piece of text. Let's come in here. I'm going to click and drag a box to make a piece of text for my tile flooring title. And let's make that text size a little bit bigger. Probably 24 is pretty good. Normally on a board, I don't think I'd go above, say, 18 for a small title like this. But because we are presenting electronically, it's going to be pretty hard to read unless we give it a decent size. And let's choose my favorite font here, Century Gothic. One trick for copying the text is you can just right-click on it, and choose transform move, and Control Shift M will get you there too. And what you can do is, we know the dimension of these objects that they're spaced. It's 3.2 inches vertically, and I have the preview button checked so that I can see where it is going. This only works if you know that particular dimension. But then instead of just moving it, I'm going to click the copy button. And like magic, I have a new copy down here of that piece of text. And like we did before, I can transform again, and again, and again. And that will make multiple copies of my text exactly the right spacing apart. Now, each drawing should have a title and, where appropriate, a scale. In this case, the floor plan is the only scaled drawing we have. But you can do that using text like we've done before. Now, I happen to like Century Gothic, but there's no underline option for Century Gothic. So I can also draw in a line, and then I can just group all of these together. I'm just going to hold down Shift to select everything, right-click on it, and choose Group. And what this allows me to do is move it around without having to grab the line separately each time. I can also copy it by holding down Alt and drag this over to make titles for my other drawing elements. And you should notice that this is all one piece of text, but I have changed the size of one piece. I don't actually need it for my material samples. They're not to scale. But either way, it allows you to have one piece of text that's easy to move around. As we begin the final kind of organization here, there are a couple things. If you see something that you want to change, this is where the value of InDesign becomes so strong. I can, if I wanted to say change the coloration of this floor plan, I could just right-click on it and choose Edit Original, and it will open up in Photoshop. So, for example, if I wanted to, I don't know, change the poche color, I could come in here with my paint bucket, start changing the poche, and then save the document. And like magic, when I close out of Photoshop, it updates here in my main plan, or my main board. And this is a great way to do your composition. Other objects, such as this text here, this has entered as a text box. So I can just double click inside of it and remove, for example, these bubbles. I don't need that information here in my project because it's kind of silly. And all of the usual editing tools are available. Now, there is a way to link back to the original document, but it's fairly complicated, and in our case, we don't have that much text to use, so we can just edit it here in place. Now, I happen to like the way this board was arranged. It has a nice big solid image up here, but it also has kind of bars of other elements, in this case a white bar with orthographic plans. So I'm not going to copy it exactly, but I do like the sort of subtle way that some of the text sits on top of the images and the overall arrangement. So I'll try to do that in my project. And overall, looking at the board, and of course I don't have all my titles and things in, but maybe I'm going to try to arrange all of these objects so that they are aligned with each other, the titles and the images, and make them nice and straight. I'm also going to go with an even distance from the edge of the board. I could probably make these bigger. I could put them on the other side. There are any number of different options. Now, I think each of my boards is going to be a little different, so I'm not going to put any background graphics on the master page. Instead, I'll just draw it individually. Now, I'd like to use an organizational technique we've seen both in AutoCAD and in Adobe Illustrator, which is layers. And we don't have to. It's probably overkill, but I'm going to create a new layer here, and I can label it. And this way I have a layer, the little pen indicates that it's the current drawing layer. So anything that I draw just will show up on that layer. And again, not required, but it is awfully handy as you add elements like this to be able to turn them on and off and kind of judge their effect. Now, the basic thing that most students do and that you'll see in all of our precedents is they can either add areas of color. So I'll just add an area of color over here in my materials sample. And here I've added a box, but you see it covers up the objects that I want to see. Usually if you drag it below the other layer, the object that you just drew should show up behind. You can also draw in a gradient. Here, if I click on the fill color, I've been picking colors here, but there also is a gradient tool, which you can choose, and you can even control where the gradient goes and how strong it is, or even just drag the color left and right to get some final adjustments. Even let's make it go 90 degrees. And so you can get some very interesting effects. Again, as long as you're on the correct layer, it should show up behind your objects. And of course, some objects probably aren't going to look so good just sitting on a gray background. So you might consider adding back in a fill color. I'll just add some white here to this paper so that it shows up on top of the background color. Another fun little effect you can add is actually an effect. Under the FX menu, which we have seen before in Photoshop and Illustrator, there is a number of different ones, but the drop shadow is a great one. You can just add it in, control the size and depth of it, and I'll just leave it as the appearance here. Click OK, and just adds a little bit of interest to your board. You may want to move your text down or control the drawing order if need be, so that the drop shadow doesn't affect the text quite so strongly. Another good one that you can add to give drawing some definition is you can just add a stroke onto the frame. Again, you can choose a color and a stroke width. And you can even choose, our different line types that we saw before. Also, as you lay out, say, objects on your board, you can control the drawing order of the by just right-clicking on the object and choose Arrange, Send to Back. And each object can kind of clip the other by their drawing order. Okay, so we've got our boards laid out. Now, of course, I haven't actually finished my example. I would surely appreciate it if you would finish your projects. And of course, everybody's graphics are slightly different. But, and I will give you feedback, of course, once you post them. But how do you post them? Do not post or even send an InDesign document. And the reason is because it has links to all these other documents that I won't get, because you will have them on your computer, not on mine. So we need to convert this thing into something we can all read, and that is a PDF file. PDFs are great for any number of reasons. The biggest one is that it maintains the fonts that are in your drawing. Even if you've gone to the internet and downloaded some cool font, you can export it as a PDF and it will remain embedded in there. So choose Export. I'm going to name it Final Boards because that's what I'm working on. And of course I could call it, IA or ARC 104 or 103, whatever our class name is, or my name would even be smarter. But on Canvas, it will have your name attached to it. And then click Save. It will prompt you for a number of options, and you can get as deep into the weeds as you want, but the main thing that you have to worry about is all pages. You absolutely want it to have all pages. If you have pages facing each other like a book, those are called spreads, and you will probably want to export it as spreads so that it reads kind of like a book. You can also create separate PDF files, but we generally do not want to do that. If you do have any bookmarks or hyperlinks in your document, hyperlinks being links to web pages, you can absolutely do that and export those as part of your PDF file. But otherwise, the PDF printing printer, the virtual printer, allows you to choose a smaller or larger file size. High quality print is probably what we want so that I can see the detail. Absolutely, when you go to print, you should not print from an InDesign file. You should create a PDF file, just as a rule. And as we've seen in AutoCAD, it's required pretty much most of the time when you're printing. Anyway, there are some other tabs on here under compression. Right now, it's set to highest quality image. Obviously, if you choose one of the ones that are lower quality, this will scrunch your file down into a smaller file size, but the quality will go down. So just click Export and browse to find the document. Location for saving. And clearly, if it gives you this error message, you have some links to files that you have updated. Now, it will warn you before you export if you have made any changes to other documents. Now, in my case, I'm working all on my project, but if you are collaborating with other people across a network, InDesign will recognize if they have changed the document. So be careful and make sure you've got the documents you expect. And that is basically how you can put together your project for presentation. And we will present the PDF files. You can print the PDF files as well. And if you feel like you'd rather have multiple pages, more than the 2 indicated here, by all means. And of course, if you don't like the arrangement of my files, you can change that as well.